where our washer and dryer were in our utility room, and he would go in that utility room and develop pictures. But there's this one stuff that he would use that's called toner, and after he developed the pictures, he'd put it in there, and it'd make it like, instead of black and white, it'd be kind of like brown and white. What would you call it?
Sepia.
Sepia. And that stuff smelled, oh, it was awful, like rotten egg gas. Oh, it smelled, and the laundry room was right down near our bedroom, so we could smell that stuff when he'd use it. But all the time he'd be working on pictures, and sometimes at night he'd come home and he'd have a picture and he's some kind of a little chemical or paint or something, because a lot of times that kind of developing pictures, there'd be a little white spot or something where there was maybe a piece of dust on the lens, and he'd be filling in that little white spot on the picture that he developed. He loved photography, and he never went anywhere without a book. I'd ride with him somewhere, like if we were going out of town on a Sunday, he'd go out of town to speak somewhere. He'd have a book in the car right next to him that he could read. He loved to read and to learn. He never went anywhere without a book. When he was a young man and he worked on the farm, he was studying law. And like if he was plowing behind horses, he'd sit on whatever the equipment was. He'd go to the end of the row, people would watch him, he'd go to the end of the row, they wouldn't turn the horses around and go back till he finished his paragraph. They'd turn around, and as they went back down the road, he'd be reading and studying. He loved to study and learn. And he didn't have a college degree, but he was the most intelligent man I ever met. If he was talking with people where he needed to use big words, he'd do that. But if he was talking with just normal people, you just think, oh, this is just a normal old guy. But he was sharp. He had several court cases that were interesting. There used to be a very, very famous lawyer called F. Lee Bailey. And he appeared before my dad once. My dad threatened him with contempt of court if he kept up his antics. Because F. Lee Bailey was this famous lawyer nationwide, and kind that's on TV. And so he was putting on some theatrics in the courtroom, and my dad told him, buddy, I'm going to hold you in contempt unless you straighten it up. After the court case, F. Lee Bailey gave him a copy of a book that he had written, signed it to my dad, and told him thank you. And he had a case with a man named Reyes Lopez Tiarina. Now, Tiarina and his family out southwest of Tucson just kind of took over some land, and they lived in school buses that they'd kind of buried in the dirt, and they refused to send their kids on the school buses to school in Arizona because they didn't want their kids waiting on the highway for the bus to come. And so, because they wouldn't send their kids to school, because they were probably right that, hey, this is terrible for our kids to wait on the highway for the bus, but their mother or somebody could have gone with them. They had all kinds of problems with the Pima County Sheriff's Department and things. And his brother broke into a store. His brother and some guys broke into a store. Tiarina's brother and some guys broke into a store and got arrested. And somehow Tiarina was able to break him out of jail. Then Tiarina moved to Oklahoma for a while, and he kind of became this religious leader. And then he went to New Mexico. And in northern New Mexico, and this is true that this really happened, in northern New Mexico, there were a lot of Mexican people that were given land grants by the King of Spain, okay, a long time ago. And then New Mexico then became part of Mexico, but Mexico honored those land grants. Those people still had that land. And then New Mexico then became part of the United States. And some shyster, that means kind of crooked attorneys and people came and figured out how to steal the land, or maybe get the land legally, but it was shady how they did it, away from all those people that had land grants. So Tiarina went up into a county called Tierra Maria, and he was fighting for these people for their land grants, trying to get their land grants back, but he was doing it kind of illegally. And he and his people then took over the courthouse in that county. And when they took over the courthouse, you just don't go take over a courthouse and kick everybody out. They took over this courthouse and a deputy was shot. And Tiarina was accused of it in state court, and he represented himself in state court and he won. So he didn't go to jail for shooting the deputy or whoever shot him. But he also was arrested because they occupied some federal land campgrounds, you know, in the national forest. And they burned some of the national forest signs and things. So he had to go to federal court for that. And he went before my dad, and my dad sent him to prison. And so Tiarina and all of his followers were called La Raza Unida. Tiarina and all of his followers were really mad at my dad, but Tiarina had to go to prison for what he did on the federal land, and he went before my dad because my dad was a federal judge. And I can remember times when I was young that we would have policemen driving by our house quite often because people would have threatened my dad as the judge. And we'd have policemen driving by quite often. But okay, that's some about my dad.